ask you to imagine a highly intelligent person. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this very intelligent person, a brilliant scientist or any other exceptionally intelligent person, the personification of intelligence, so to speak. So what kind of person do we picture as intelligent? Please write in the chat.
Normally would say a man, but not anymore. Glasses, open-minded person. Stephen Hawking, a woman, open-minded, creative person, creative. Man with a bird, a researcher, competent.
That's great, and we also see the tradition, and we also see the societal change. So some people are mentioning. So normally we would imagine a man, but today I'm imagining a woman. Yeah. So let's proceed. Yeah, we can really imagine a diverse bunch of people, very intelligent persons. So we have, for example, the youngest member of the American Association of Very Intelligent People, Casey Quest. She, at the age of 2, became the member of the Mensa Association. And then we have Maria Mirzakhani. She, as the first woman and first Iranian, became awarded with the most prestigious award in mathematics, the Fields Medal. And then from the many groundbreaking Black scientists, I pick Elijah McCoy, an engineer and inventor who revolutionized the railroad and received nearly 60 patents over the course of his life. And last but not least, a scientist we all know and who also was mentioned in the chat, Stephen Hawking, who lived his life as a scientist, as a theoretical cosmology for more than 50 years with a motor neuron disease, which impaired him heavily. So to come to our overarching topic, exclusion, inclusion, and visibility, invisibility. So when we look at our imaginations, our very first associations, which persons do we associate with being intelligent persons? We would probably not associate for the very first moment a very diverse bunch of people. So intelligence is an invisible feature, but those who are visible also before our very own inner eye are mostly a very specific and homogeneous sort of intelligence. Intelligent people, mostly white, older males. Yeah, and now we can ask the question, why are people bothered with intelligence and intelligence tests? So why are people bothered with intelligence and intelligence tests in the first place? So we could find broadly 2 reasons for this. Maybe there are also more. So because they want to find the people fitting best for specific tasks. This could be seen as an inclusive way of talent management, as, for example, the CCDI is promoting. So look out for the talents. Or because they strive to categorize beings. And this usually has the effect of forming hierarchies among beings or between people, and with the effect of excluding groups of people. And before we will proceed there in a minute, I want to briefly position myself towards the topic. I had been asked last year to add a diversity and inclusion perspective to a symposium on intelligence. And I did so as a specialist on diversity and inclusion, but not as a specialist on intelligence, which was a completely new topic to me. Doing research on this topic turned out to be very interesting and a very interesting and inspiring learning journey for me as a European white woman. After having studied psychology as a minor for my degree in economics, organizational psychology for my doctorate, and after nearly 15 years of teaching from a social psychological perspective, the dark history of psychology with its research on intelligence as foundational for scientific racism, eugenics, and also its inherent sexism has been really shocking. This is not so much part of the textbooks until today. It's kind of not really looked at in mainstream psychology. It's only minimally acknowledged. So with this talk, I will share with you my learning journey. And in this regard, I want to thank Christian Pierce wholeheartedly for sharing his expertise and adding really important aspects to this presentation. And also a thank you to my namesake, Ann-Kathrin Heidenreich, for her support in times of crisis, given these challenging topics. And now coming back to the question why people are bothered with intelligence and with intelligence testing, we can trace both of those reasons far back into history. So the first standardized tests we know about were applied in ancient China during the Han Dynasty, when officials designed civil service exams to choose people to work in the government based on merit rather than on family status. This is also what we would like to do from a diversity perspective. The other reason, striving to categorize beings, can be traced back even a bit earlier to the ancient Greeks. So Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle played a key role in laying the foundations of empirical science, whereby observations of everything from animals to humans were noted with the aim of creating taxonomic categories. Aristotle described the great chain of being as a ladder along which all objects, plants, animals, humans, and celestial bodies can be mapped in an overall hierarchy in the order of the existential importance, with humans placed near the top, just beneath the benign beings. This great chain of being, or the scala natura, is a powerful visual metaphor for divinely inspired universal hierarchy ranking all forms of higher and lower life, with men, of course, closer to God, and women closer to the animals, as well as slaves and the so-called savages. Aristotle expressed the belief that certain people are inherently more instinctive rulers, while others are more natural fits for the life of a worker or a slave. Explaining this hierarchy came along with the interest in some sort of mental attribute characterizing overall ability to think or reason. Nonetheless, even though it has been quite a while ago, intelligence became an object of direct scientific investigation only toward the end of the 18th century. At the end of the 18th century, the naturalists, Linnaeus and others, and also the naturalists, they began to compare humans systematically with other animals in the course of developing their grand taxonomies of life. Such comparisons often focused on differences in levels of mental ability and were linked by many to the notion of the great chain of being. And this was also an important consideration for the philosophers. Voltaire, he accepted Aristotle's category of natural slaves, claimed blacks to be a different and lower origin than whites, and saw blacks as being in that servile Aristotelian category. And he concluded that if their understanding is not very much different nature from us, it is at least greatly inferior. So he really relied on this hierarchy. And Kant believed all humans to be different grades of the same stock, and he emphasized the hereditary biological character of race and the graded capacities of each group's whites on top. Humanity is at its greatest perfection in the race of whites, he said. In his hierarchy, the Indians were below the whites, below them were the Africans, and at the lowest point are the American natives. For Voltaire, for many years, at the lowest point were the Jewish people. So obviously there was an urge to sort people and different groups of people on a hierarchy, and it was somehow hard to believe for them to just let them live next to each other together on an equal footing. And the same with women. They found lots of reasons why women are intellectually and from their mental abilities far below men and are much more similar to animals and children. This was all kind of the same sort. Proceeding into the 19th century, we have Darwin, who, with his theory of natural selection and sexual selection, explains supposed differences in intelligence between the sexes and races. Darwin's cousin, the statistician and explorer Galton, built on Darwin's theory and twisted it in a way to apply Darwin's theories of natural selection to the human race. In its early years, so what Darwin found out, evolution is happening just on its own by those mechanics, what he called survival of the fittest. Galton tried to use this knowledge to direct and control the evolutionary processes and to kind of breed a special human race and an even better human race. And this was the beginning of eugenics. Galton was also the person who coined the term. And in its early years, eugenics was dominated by a small and rather esoteric elite group, which sought scientifically to establish ideas about inherited characteristics and abilities that were closely linked to social class and race. Most of Galton's practical eugenics suggestions were for so-called positive eugenics, the improvement of the race by encouraging those couples deemed worthy to have larger families. However, others later then were more interested in negative eugenics, seeking by various means to control the reproduction of the unfit. Such ideas were widely taken up by social scientists, politicians, and other public figures, as well as those involved in medicine and the sciences. And we all know what this led to. Unfortunately, regarding psychology, we have to recognize that since its inception, Western academic psychology has been strongly influenced by and closely affiliated with eugenics, defined by its originators as the science of racial betterment. The role of eugenics has been minimally acknowledged in historical accounts of Western psychology. Also, it was fundamental to the establishment of empirical psychology methods, as well as its applied theories, specifically behaviorism. While developing his ideas on eugenics, Galton tried to prove that different groups of people differ regarding their cognitive abilities and virtues. Of course, with his own group, British white upper class males, at the top of his own hierarchy. And the interest in intelligence then surged with the development of intelligence testing methods by Galton and Binet. They had a very different approach towards intelligence testing. So while Galton used tests to prove supposed intellectual differences between groups of people, Binet was interested in finding out who can profit most from an educational program. He was asked by the French government to develop tests in order to include so-called impaired kids in the educational system. So if we want to appreciate Galton's work, we can say he was the first to study intelligence somehow what you could label a scientific way. He recognized the need to study and formulate a theory and test it with empirical data. And at that time, that was a major and unique contribution. From today's perspective, however, his theory was flawed, not only regarding race and sex dimensions, but also regarding disabilities. Does a person, for example, who is nearsighted, deserve to be labeled as less intelligent than a person with a full vision? So those were also, he tested for perceptive abilities and concluded then in the end that nearsighted people or with an impaired vision are therefore less intelligent. I think it's worth to mention that Galton spoke crudely of the lower range of the intellectual spectrum. He claimed the discriminative facility of idiots is curiously low. They hardly distinguish between heat and cold, and their sense of pain is so obtuse that some of the more idiotic seem hardly to know what it is. In their dull lives, such pain as can be excited in them may literally be accepted with welcome surprise. Oh, this is a real cruel approach to his own, to the people he's studying himself, and it's tragic that this approach of thinking had such a big influence in the beginning of psychological studies. And on the other hand, we could say this quotation probably tells us more about Galton than it does about people with low intelligence. And it's even unclear if he had any evidence to support his analysis. But we have clear evidence of his disdain for such people. And we could maybe think if it's only Galton, perhaps we could write this off as idiosyncratic. But too much of the history of intelligence work reveals similar attitudes towards people of low intelligence. And with his research, he provided the foundation for eugenics and scientific racism with all its brutal consequences. And in contrast to this approach, Binet's intent was helping children who have mental difficulties. And he, unlike Galton, he believed that intelligence is modifiable, and even designed a technique, what he called mental orthopedics, to help children improve their cognitive skill. The divide between the approaches of Binet and Galton and those who followed has been mainly centered in the controversy about heritability versus malleability of intelligence. And we can say Binet stands for malleability and Galton for heritability. And we will have a look at the socio-political implications of leaning towards either side. So in other words, the implications in terms of excluding versus including certain groups of people. So including, like Binet was asking, who can profit most from an educational program? So those are the big questions which were in the end, they are partly discussed until today. even though most of them should have laid to rest in the last century. Are there really group differences? And if yes, how can they be explained? And this is intertwined with this question, how much is it nature versus nurture, or heritability versus malleability? And deciding on these questions has a lot of social political consequences. And so it's always, we always have to think about how is this kind of intelligence research made use of. I'll jump over this. The strong thing about the intelligence is the very high predictive power of the intelligence quotient. We can predict future academic achievement and also other success in life, which makes it kind of very outstanding among other concepts in the behavioral sciences. And when we look at those group differences, one question which also followed the history of intelligence research was always, are there any sex differences? And people started to measure total brain size, total brain volume, and try to conclude that because women do in average have smaller brains, their reasoning is also kind of reduced, which is not up to date anymore. And there are indeed some few differences regarding spatial reasoning or also verbal reasoning, but it's not really clear if this is if this lies in the biology of those different brains or if it has more to do with the way people are raised. And a big discussion was on group differences between the so-called races, and where the approach by Galton was taken up by Louis Terman, and in effect they tried to naturalize inequality in the United States. And they used the eugenics movement to scientifically prove that there are intellectual abilities, and they even went to Congress and recommended stopping all the social welfare programs because it's not worth it, it's kind of natural, that's what they said. In the end, the Genetic Society of America, they tried to find a resolution which was very controversial, and people fighted for either side. But they realized that it's important that those big scientific societies will position themselves towards this debate. And in the end, they concluded that from a scientific viewpoint, there's no convincing evidence of genetic difference in intelligence between the races. And very recently, also the APA, the American Psychological Association, issued an apology to people of color for their own role in promoting, perpetuating, and failing to challenge racism, racial discrimination, and human hierarchy in the US. I realized that we don't have so much time anymore, so I won't dive into this too deeply. We can say there's no definite answer on this heritability question. Some say it's kind of 50-50, but it depends a lot. So for example, when we look at people with low socioeconomic status, then the environmental factors play a much larger role with in comparison to people with a high socioeconomic status. And there we also are considering the importance of social and environmental influences on the development of intelligence. And it has been found out that when children grow up in clean environments, they develop a much better IQ than if they are in get all the toxins and pollution. And so it's dependent from the environmental factors, but also from socioeconomic factors, from psychosocial factors, and from healthcare and nutrition. And so we see those are a lot of context factors which are very important to consider and also to offer a good context for the following generations. And another topic I wanted to mention is it's not just, when we talk about intelligence, it's not just about testing intelligence in a scientific way, but we also need to think about what are our intelligence ascriptions. So like with the question at the beginning, there are not so many people who really perform an intelligence test, but still in our daily lives, we ascribe intelligence to people and to ourselves. And it has huge consequences on which kind of jobs we get and how the teachers will support us. And those social intelligence ascriptions, they differ and they depend also on the diversity categories we bring with us or which we are described. And some of the ascriptions relating to gender are that, for example, parents tend to think that their sons are brighter than their daughters. And they also, the fathers themselves would say they are more intelligent than their wives. And the women are rather described as caring, emotional, and competent. As caring and emotional instead of being described as competent or intelligent. And this is not just a stereotype, it has really grave consequences for the self-ascriptions regarding intelligence. So many more girls lack confidence in the STEM sciences. And regarding to ethnicity or race, we also have very strong intelligence ascriptions. So children, even Black children, associate white men with brilliance. And then there's a further aspect. People of Asian descent are often assumed to be highly intelligent and educated and function as a model minority. And this is also visible in sports journalism, so that if they would tell us about the NFL, that they would say the Black players, they are very strong and athletic, and the white players, they have a good strategy to play. And they have high intellectual abilities. With the consequences that people even suffer from racial disparities in the health system, for example, because the doctors also use those ascriptions and they feel singled out. And with that, now I touched upon race and gender and also a bit on class. We always have to keep in mind that those dimensions, they might interweave. And then we have to think about the concept of intersectionality. And we can say that it's not just adding up, but the experience of discriminations or devaluing description is more than just the sum of its part, as Kimberly Crenshaw taught us. And hence we also have intersectional consequences. So for example, especially women people of color, female people of color, they have the burden of both dimensions. So what can we do? Having learned about all these aspects around intelligence. So I think on the side of the heritability, malleability paradox, we have seen that those who tend towards the heritability side, they are not interested in politics which support social welfare and are about they feel responsible for creating a better context where kids and people can learn. And so this is the main learning, that we have to watch out that we all together create a context where we can all feel safe and unfold our potential. And the other thing is that we should enhance the visibility of diversity when we talk about intelligence, and also with highly regarded jobs, which we assume we need very intelligent people. So we need those diverse role models. And looking back at our history, we need to be aware about the historical patterns of oppression and inequality. And then we can specifically also think about social psychological interventions which tackle educational inequalities, so that we really affirm people who suffer from negative intelligence ascriptions, and that we look out that everybody can feel social belonging in the groups in which they learn, and that we start from a growth mindset before we think about interventions, that we really help people grow. So this is my input, and now I hope, as I hoped, we have 20 minutes left for discussion, and I'm happy to know what you think, or what you think we can do with those insights from the history of intelligence research.
Hi, Anna-Katrin, my name is Pim. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question. May sound like a weird question, but what does intelligence even mean? I feel like it's more of a political word, like democracy or democrat, that is so loaded and there's so many different meanings. Is there an academic definition of intelligence? Would you mind sharing that?
I try to go back to this. Oh, no, I had a definition slide which I jumped over. It's a very narrow definition usually. So there's not one definition, but it's all about abstract problem solving, reasoning techniques and mathematical reasoning, also some verbal reasoning. And what they found out, and why the construct is so strong, is that they all seem to relate quite strongly together, and they relate to academic success and also in our educational system. But it also relies a lot on our educational system. So you couldn't go test children who have not visited schools like we are used to.
So if I understand you correctly, to paraphrase back to you, so I like to watch a lot of football, right? And in football, they always talk about football intelligence. Now, there used to be a football player, Alexandro Pirlo, who was famous for being incredibly insightful in the field. That would not be considered part of intelligence in an academic field. So if I understand it, academics defined intelligence as in you're good in academics. So it's kind of tautological.
There are many definitions where they say it's the way you can deal with a specific task. So it's always this fit task, which is also important. But I remember an intelligence researcher who is really the expert on intelligence. So I don't feel expert enough to answer your question. And she said the strong predictability and the worth of the definition is only when you take this narrow understanding of intelligence. And for example, you can talk about emotional intelligence, which might be also important. But the strong predictability doesn't apply to this. So it's a kind of a self-circular system. So I probably this is also what you mean. It's a bit a self-circular definition. The academics.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I mean, can have a long conversation about that, but I'll leave the floor open for someone else to ask a question. Thank you, Anna.
Thanks. Should I look for the questions in the chat, or I
suggest to take a look at the chat of Opin already wrote his question there and said it now, right? So let's see. Although he went there in more another direction with AI and so on. This is for the daily status. Yeah, there are many comments, but not questions. Do you have any question for us here?
And there's somebody raising their hand.
Let me check. I don't see no more. Yes, one. Let's see who is it. Fava Brandley Amolo, please talk.
Hi, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Yvonne Apio Brandley Amolo. Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. It was enlightening, for lack of another word. And I just want to actually expound on what the previous speaker was saying, because I find the whole intelligence description and the direction it went to be really one-sided. For now, I would say Eurocentric because we are in Europe, but it also does apply to the States as well, because this is assuming that all those who are in the global South lack intelligence, because you cannot use these same measurements to measure the children or the people from there, because they have a completely different way of learning. They had a completely different way of learning. And when you base your measure of intelligence on people having gone to Western schools, this is really one-sided, I think. We just had recently a conference at the UN where we were talking about trying to use also literature, intelligence, and know-how from the global South, because exactly this problem. A lot of our children here in Europe are judged by this exact way of measuring intelligence and found lacking in a lot of schools here, because their kind of intelligence and the way they're taught, the knowledge they have come from two different diverse cultures. So this is really one big problem we are facing in schools here with children with a migration background. What do you think, and how do you think we should be able to work on this? Because it's really affecting the children with migration backgrounds.
Yeah, for the one thing, I think this dissolves the rest of the group differences, which might be still there. So over the time, group differences, what they measured in the US between Black and whites, they diminished, and everybody got more intelligent. That's also the Flynn effect. And taking all these aspects into account, the socioeconomic status and the educational experience, and we can be really sure that there's nothing left from a biological or hereditary dimension. And then the thing is, for which kind of tasks do we really need to have intelligence tests? So of course, only where this kind of academic knowledge is relevant. and it should not be relevant for other tasks. And then the question is also, how do we define academic knowledge, and couldn't we incorporate other ways of knowledge there as well? And so I think I think there are some good good implications for using tests if they help us to be more objective. So if sometimes if we think about who might go to an elite university and we have those tests, then at least the socioeconomic backgrounds and the parental background doesn't interfere too much. So we have a kind of objectifying moment. But on the other hand, we have to think about what are the measurements and values we want to select at the first place. I'm not sure if this was the answer also to your comment. But yeah.
Not really, but that's okay.
Could you please put the emphasis on what I missed now? Could you please tell me what was your point, that I understand it better?
I think maybe somebody in the chat just also wrote something that may put some emphasis there, because I was just saying exactly that. The tests we currently have are biased because they are not including exactly what you're mentioning, the social background, and exactly these tests prevent the younger generation from getting into these elite universities. Mm-hmm. Because they are still based on the whole eugenics and all these other measurements that were used before. Maybe they have tried to improve them a little bit, but what I'm saying is you should take into account the social background of a child, because this influences a lot how they react to anything. When we say academic intelligence and we are not putting into account emotional intelligence, I would say if I gave two children who are have different backgrounds, and that has also been scientifically proven if we want to use science, a task to deal with, a child with a migration background is able to multitask much better than a child that has a more Eurocentric background, because the children here are taught to concentrate on just one task at one time, whereas from another background, to something else. But yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
I fully support this, and I think we have to question if those are the right characteristics we are asking for, and also the right capabilities we are asking for to go to visit higher education. Yeah,
yes, because these tests. Yeah, because these tests are not the people who develop these tests hardly include people with a migration background.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So it's based on their thoughts, their knowledge, their way of thinking. That's just what I'm trying to point out. But I don't want to take too much time. I'm sure somebody else wants to say something. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. And I think that's the core of the thing we have to work on now to make them more inclusive. And there's a whole range of literature on intercultural intelligence testing. What does this mean in different cultures, and how can we kind of apply this to make it more interculturally relevant? And for example, when they have identified group differences between the sexes, the intelligence test is by definition leveled. So the intelligence test cannot identify any group differences between the sexes, but this is by definition. And so maybe we should also invent something that we have different cultures and that it doesn't exclude certain people with certain cultural backgrounds. So we really have to work on, we always have to monitor who's going to be privileged and who's going to be excluded from this form of testing. And then we have to think about how we can make it more inclusive. This is what I would wish, yeah. Ditch the whole world intelligence. Yeah. Or go back to its original meaning from the etymology. So Cicero said intelligere is to understand, and it's important that we understand each other. So maybe we should reframe what we mean with intelligent and go back to the original meaning. Julio, are you, do you have an overview about all those?
Yes, you just answered quite a few of the questions before. The moment you said, look, you should go about doing like this, see that the way the testing is being done and so on is changed and gets more inclusive, in fact. Okay, and now lots of questions like this. I'm fascinated how an emotional topic that it is, because this is something that we all are confronted with at some point in our lives, right? When someone deems themselves better, more intelligent or capable or able than any of us. And that, of course, that hurts when we were a kid or so on. And when we see all those testings going around and that they are still being done, I can see why all the rage here in the chat. Like we are getting to Facebook commentary level that if we don't stop people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think this is a good moment for final words.
For final words from.
Yeah, we're reaching the end. Do you have any concluding
audience?
words for us, please?
Mm-hmm.
Anna Catherine.
Yeah, I would. I think the intelligence testing system has a lot of flaws, and maybe it's also fundamentally flawed from the outset when we see that it. But it depends. Maybe it depends. Do we rather go in the direction of Galton? Then I would say it's fundamentally flawed from the outset, and we should just throw it into the bin. Or if we go back to Binet and what he tried to achieve with those testings. And I think there are examples where people, for example, in primary schools, where we can enable people from lower socioeconomic status or also from with a migration background with those tests to realize, to break up all those other selection mechanisms where they would maybe fall through, and maybe those tests would then help them to enter the next stage and make it a bit more fair when we don't have it completely fair. So this is why I don't want to throw them out altogether, because I think it might counterweigh or outbalance other forms of selection, which are also very power-driven. And if we could tap into this potential to use testing procedures, but then we also have to think about what are the relevant capabilities we want to achieve or we want to have, then we can use them for an inclusive sense. But maybe we have to define this from the outset, to use the testing systems to improve our selection processes so that they are more fair for everybody.
Thank you very much, Anna. Very important, people. Let's not shoot the messenger, okay? Like Anna brought us here to see, like this has to do all with visibility. If we don't know how people thought about stuff, we're bound to make the mistakes again. So, it is useful to also listen to such stuff that we, of course, may like find barbaric and what is that and wow. And it's good that you know that, because then we don't do it again. And I believe Pim made a very interesting comment regarding artificial intelligence, because I ask myself how many people go doing artificial intelligence stuff, go and check this kind of knowledge as well, and make the parallels. Okay, look, we don't want to do that with our AI because it's bound to do the same kind of stuff. It's not a coincidence that we had the situation with the racist AIs and so on. That exclusion, inclusion, this is a very interesting topic that people from any branch can profit from. Great. That said,
I have to say hi to Lisa, who just wrote in the chat. Hi, Lisa.
Hi there.
You're here. And yeah, you are totally right. So we must not stifle motivation with intelligence tests. That's also a good final word.
Cool. With that said, I thank everybody. Looking forward for those who are going to be tomorrow here in person for the talks that we're going to have, and reserve the date next year, sort of almost at the same time period, the second week of September. We're going to have our 4th Diversity and Inclusion Week. So in a year from now, you're going to see this. In between, we have my own digital week where we see the modernization of life and how it works, but that's for another topic. And with that said, thanks